Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, Boris Johnson has denied that the government has been biased in the allocation of funds to struggling towns. Fewer than a fifth of the constituencies which will benefit from £1 billion announced in yesterday's budget have a Labour MP. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, said that looked like pork barrel politics. Labour has also questioned why the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak's own seat of Richmond in Yorkshire, is in line to benefit from a separate levelling up fund, despite being one of the least deprived areas in the country. Our political correspondent, Liz Bates, has spent the day there.
Levelling up. It's the election promise that has echoed through the left-behind areas of the UK. And yesterday, the Chancellor finally coughed up.
I'm launching the first round of the Levelling Up Fund today, inviting applications from local areas across the United Kingdom.
But less than 24 hours later, the Prime Minister was forced to sail to his rescue after allegations that the cash is being spent disproportionately in Conservative areas.
I've asked about this, and I'm told that the criteria are entirely objective, and they look at all sorts of data, poverty, employment, and so on.
This is Richmond in North Yorkshire, a market town and a tourist hotspot, and especially when you compare it to other places around here, it's far from deprived. And yet yesterday it was ranked priority one, top of the list, to get access to a £4.8 billion levelling up fund. That was announced in the budget by the Chancellor, who is also the MP for Richmond. On the government's own scale of deprivation, with one as the most deprived, Richmond is 450 out of 533. 80 miles south in Sheffield, there are some areas that go as low as 12 on that scale, and yet they've been classified as priority 2 for the Levelling Up Fund. The Sheffield City Region Mayor wants to know why.
It's nakedly political. We urgently need some transparency from the Chancellor about the decision-making process. I don't think by any independent, fair metric that can be the right approach, and I want the Chancellor to clarify as a matter of urgency.
But back in Richmond, their priority 1 status was well received. Do you think that's fair?
Good. Well, yeah, he lives here.
Do you think that's how
I would do exactly the same.
Do you think it's one of the most deprived places?
No, I don't know.
So do you think it's a good thing that Rishi Sunak has put Richmond top of the list?
Yeah, bless him.
For years, in fact, governments have left the rural areas behind. I think it's great to have a Chancellor that recognises the rural plight. And when I say rural, I don't just mean Richmondshire, I mean the rural plight throughout the country. Because that levelling up was required.
And it isn't just the Levelling Up Fund that is under fire. More cash from the Towns Fund was dished out yesterday to mostly Tory areas. Rishi Sunak used his budget to confirm extra spending in a string of towns across England. He said the funds were to rebalance economic investment. He's giving more than £1 billion to 45 towns. But of the 56 constituencies which will benefit from these grants, 47 are Conservative, only 9 are Labour. One of those seats is Newark, where the MP is Community Secretary Robert Jenrick. In a statement today, his department said he had nothing to do with the decision.
But what we saw yesterday was an announcement for funding allocated and no accompanying release of documents or announcements of how that decision-making was actually carried out. And it isn't right to reduce people's future prosperity to electoral politics.
The government has insisted the methodology is clear and fair. The bidding process for the first round of the Levelling Up Fund will run until mid-June.
If there was precious little in the budget about health and social care, the government's levelling up agenda was, if not front, then in the centre. To that end, Rishi Sunak said applications were being sought for some of the £4.8 billion levelling up fund for local infrastructure, and just over £1 billion fund from the Towns Fund will be divided among 45 towns in England. But it was the identity of these towns that has upset Keir Starmer, who described the allocation as fishy, with the vast majority of the areas represented by Tory MPs, and areas such as Sunak's own constituency put in the top tier to receive money from the Levelling Up Fund. Here's our policy editor, Lewis Goodall.
It's a testament to the triumph of Boris Johnson's Conservatism, the reconfiguration of Britain's electoral geography, that you can travel through much of the north these days and barely leave Tory seats.
Here we are, Treasury HQ.
And funnily enough, not far from Darlington, the Treasury's new half-home, is Richmond, part of Richmondshire District Council, which just so happens to be part of the constituency of one Rishi Sunak MP. It's one of the more prosperous corners of England, yet it finds itself in the fortunate position of being one of the 93 places on the priority list of the government's £4.8 billion Levelling Up Fund announced in yesterday's budget. The list has some other places you might not expect to see when levelling up from poor to rich, like the Derbyshire Dales, the 265th most deprived local authority in England of 315, is on the list. East Northamptonshire, 226th. Lewis, 194th. Sunak's Richmondshire, 251st, is on the list, but Barnsley, the 38th most deprived in the country, isn't. These anomalies have led some to accuse the government of pork barrel spending, preferential treatment to councils which have Conservative parliamentary seats. According to our calculations, Conservative seats are somewhat overrepresented. Of the 93 local authorities in England included, 55 are represented by Tory MPs only, 24 Labour MPs only, with 14 represented by a mix. But crucially, the Conservative areas on the list are on average much less deprived than the Labour ones, and 32 of the seats that the Tories won in 2019 look set to benefit. That's more than half of their total gains in England.
I've written to the Chancellor, and I think for the sake of transparency, he needs to urgently publish the criteria, because until he does, we won't be able to move through this. I don't think anyone really can think that Richmond in North Yorkshire, which is a wonderful place and I hold it in the highest of regard, but I don't think it can be more deserving for investment than Barnsley and Sheffield and a range of other places across the north of England.
The Treasury says that a variety of criteria have been used in drawing up the list, though they haven't told us what the precise formula is, whilst also saying that anywhere can apply, even if they're not currently prioritised.
We have about 70 people a week, which are quite...
It's also true to say that even bucolic Richmondshire has real pockets of poverty.
And as you can see behind us, we've got a food share project going on, so not all of Richmondshire is leafy. There is areas where people need sort of like that help and additional support. Connectivity, so that broadband is a major issue, so people don't stay and they move on. The prices of houses, you talk about it being sort of like, it's not affordable, so therefore people move out of the areas, which has an impact on businesses. And we shouldn't miss out just because it's Rishi's patch. And thank you, Rishi.
Look, this may be a bit of pork barrel politics, it may not, but there's a different way of looking at this. The fact that we're still talking about moving civil servants around, about Whitehall directing what is, in the grand scheme of things, still small amounts of money, about enterprise zones, about free ports, which have been tried before, perhaps indicates that the levelling up agenda isn't that radical yet, isn't that different to things which have been tried by governments in the past. There is a different form of levelling up, which some argue would be more powerful, which would involve Whitehall ceding political power to local areas, not just directing spending, and of that there is precious little sign.
In areas where there has a devolved authority, is it really sensible for civil servants to be deciding whether Kirklees is less or more in need than Leeds, whether Barnsley or Rotherham are the bigger priority? I just don't think that in the end that's a sensible way to make policy when we've got infrastructure here in the north of England that should be able to do these things on behalf of government.
In other words, with funds like this, it is Whitehall which still decides, and a real transformation of our economic geography is almost certainly going to need more than that.
Lewis Goodall. An HM Treasury spokesperson told us all local areas in the UK will be able to apply for funding through the Levelling Up Fund. The bandings do not represent eligibility criteria, and money will be allocated to the areas most in need. Of the Towns Fund, they said, the process was comprehensive, robust and fair, and will provide much needed funding for those left behind towns that need it the most.